There she was, huddled between garbage bags, her tiny hands sifting through rotten food scraps. But when the cold eyes of a billionaire met hers, a small birthmark on the child's face made his heart leap. It couldn't be. Or could it? What happened next would forever change their destinies, revealing a secret buried for 6 years that would shake the foundations of a multi-billion-dollar empire. Subscribe to the channel for stories that touch your heart every day. The private elevator glided silently to the 50th floor, carrying a man worth more than some small countries. His fingers drummed impatiently on the Italian marble that lined the mirrored walls, endlessly reflecting his image. Bespoke suit, Swiss watch that cost the equivalent of a house, handmade shoes from Milan. Everything perfect, everything calculated, everything empty. The morning meeting had ended with yet another multi-million-dollar acquisition. 3 companies swallowed up in a single morning, like collecting baseball cards. The numbers danced in his mind with the coldness of a mathematical equation: profit, margin, growth, expansion. Words that echoed in the emptiness of an existence built on foundations of steel and concrete, but devoid of any human warmth. He got out of the imported car on the usual corner, where he always stopped to buy the Wall Street Journal. The driver remained in the vehicle, engine running, air conditioning blasting, a bubble of comfort that isolated him from the real world outside. He didn't even need to get out. His secretary could deliver the paper directly to the office. But those 5 minutes on the street were his only concession to normalcy, his only moment of contact with the world beyond the glass walls of his empire. The neighborhood where he stopped was one of the most exclusive in the city. Mansions rose like fortresses of marble and iron, protected by high walls and security cameras. Luxury cars cruised the wide, tree-lined streets, transporting people who, like him, lived in bubbles of privilege. It was a world of impeccable appearances, where every detail was carefully orchestrated to convey power, status, success. A few yards away, almost imperceptible in the shadows cast by the high walls, a small figure moved. Tiny hands rummaged through garbage bags with the expertise of someone who had turned it into an art of survival. The girl shouldn't have been. And there, street children weren't part of the aesthetic of that part of town. But there she was, ignored like a ghost by the hurried passers-by. Her dark hair fell in tangled strands over her dirty face, partially hiding features that still retained the delicacy of childhood despite the harshness of life on the streets. The clothes, repeatedly patched, hung loosely on her small, thin body. Her bare feet moved carefully among the debris, avoiding shards of glass and sharp objects with the skill of someone who had learned to navigate dangers from a very young age. She didn't beg, she didn't hold out her hand, she didn't bother anyone. She just looked silently and invisibly for something that could serve as food or shelter. A scrap of bread that wasn't completely moldy, a piece of cardboard that could serve as a mattress, a plastic bottle that could be exchanged for a few coins. The billionaire passed by her as he had hundreds of times before, without seeing, without noticing, without caring. For him, poverty was an abstract concept, something that existed in government statistics and in the social responsibility reports of his companies. It had no face, no story, no tangible reality in his air-conditioned and perfumed world. But that day, something made him stop. Maybe it was the way the morning light filtered through the trees touched the child's face. Maybe it was the stark contrast between his own opulence and the misery of that little figure. Or maybe it was simply chance, what some call fate, causing his eyes to look down at the exact moment. When their eyes met, time seemed to freeze. The girl's eyes were big and dark, filled with a precocious wisdom that only suffering can imprint on the soul. There was no plea in that look, no desperate hope, just a resignation that cut like a blade through all the layers of indifference he had built around his heart. He should have kept going. He should have gone into the store, bought his newspaper, returned to the car and continued with his millionaire routine. But something held him there, as if an invisible force prevented him from looking away from those eyes that seemed to carry the weight of the world. The girl didn't move either. For a moment, two completely opposite realities touched at that. Crossroads of gazes, the world of luxury and the world of need, the universe of privilege and the territory of survival. Two human beings separated by a social abyss, but united by something deeper, a connection that neither of them could understand at that moment. The billionaire's heart pounded in a way that hadn't happened in years. It wasn't the calculated, quickening of an important negotiation or the controlled adrenaline of a risky investment. It was something primitive, instinctive, that came from a place he thought he had sealed off forever. His steps led him closer to the girl, as if moved by their own volition. The distance between them decreased meter by meter, and with each step, details that were previously invisible became clear and disturbing. The fragility of her thin arms, the paleness of her skin that indicated malnutrition, the way she cowered, slightly like a wounded animal expecting another blow. But it was when he crouched down to her level that the world collapsed on his head. Just below the girl's left eye, small and delicate like a dark petal, was a birthmark. It wasn't common. It was shaped like a crescent moon, with irregular edges that seemed to draw a small constellation on her child's skin. A unique, distinctive mark, impossible to mistake for any other. His hands trembled. The air seemed to grow scarce in his lungs. Memories he had buried under layers of work and indifference surfaced like an emotional avalanche. 6 years ago, his wife had carried in her womb the promise of a daughter. They had chosen the name together, decorated the baby's room, dreamed of the future they would build as a family. But she was born prematurely, with complications that the doctors said were fatal. He never saw her. They said it would be better that way, that he should keep only the happy memories of the pregnancy. His wife hadn't survived the complications of childbirth. In a single night, he had lost everything, the woman he loved, and the daughter he never got to meet. The doctors had been kind, but direct. The child had been born with a distinctive mark on her face, a crescent-shaped birthmark that was identical to the one his wife also had. A genetic inheritance that would pass from mother to daughter, but that would never manifest because the little one hadn't survived. Or so he was told. Now, before him, a girl of approximately 6 years old bore the exact same mark. It wasn't a coincidence. It was impossible that it was a coincidence. The shape, the position, even the coloring were identical to what they had described about his lost daughter. "What's your name?" The question left his lips before he could control it. The girl stared at him with those huge eyes, but didn't answer. Maybe she didn't know. Maybe no one had ever cared enough to ask. "Where are your parents?" He tried again, his voice softer now. She shook her head slowly, a gesture that could mean many things. She didn't know. She didn't have any. She didn't want to say. He reached out his hand, slowly, like approaching an injured bird. She didn't flinch, but she didn't move closer either. She just watched him with that disturbing intensity that seemed to read through his soul. "Are you hungry?" he asked, noticing how the child's ribs were visible under her torn shirt. This time, she nodded almost imperceptibly. Without thinking about the consequences, he picked her up in his arms. She was lighter than he expected, as if she were made of paper and dreams. She didn't resist, but she didn't snuggle either. She remained rigid, alert, ready to flee at the first sign of danger. The driver almost choked when he saw his boss approaching the car with a street child in his arms. His eyes widened, but he was far too well trained to question any decision of the man who paid his salary. "Home," said the billionaire, settling the girl on the Italian leather seat. "And call Dr. Harrison. Tell him it's urgent." During the ride, he couldn't take his eyes off her. The mark on her face seemed to pulse like a beacon in the darkness. Of his certainties, every fiber of his being screamed that this was impossible, that he was allowing emotion to cloud his logic. But another part, a part that he thought had died along with his wife, whispered a single word: hope. The girl looked out the window with fascination, as if she were seeing the world for the first time. The tall buildings, the manicured gardens, the well-dressed people walking along the clean sidewalks. Everything was new, strange, almost unreal for someone who had grown up among garbage and abandonment. When they arrived at the mansion, she hesitated before getting out of the car. The house rose before her like a fairy tale palace, with its perfect gardens and imposing architecture. It was a world that didn't belong to her reality, a place where girls like her weren't allowed to set foot. But he reached out his hand again, and this time she took it. The housekeeper almost dropped the silver tray when she saw her boss enter the front door with a street child. Her eyes, trained for perfection, immediately noticed every detail out of place. The bare feet leaving traces on the Italian marble, the dirty clothes contrasting with the elegance of the environment, the smell of the street spreading through the perfumed entrance hall. "Sir?" she managed to articulate, her voice filled with surprise and poorly disguised disapproval. "Prepare a bath," he said, his voice firmer than he felt inside, "and provide clean clothes, anything that fits her." "But sir, I don't know if—" The employee hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "Now," he cut her off, his tone brooking no argument. As the housekeeper walked away, muttering comments he preferred not to hear, he led the girl through the wide corridors of the mansion. Her steps were small and hesitant on the gleaming floor, as if she feared breaking something or staining with her presence that immaculate environment. Dr. Harrison arrived in less than an hour, as he always did when called. He had been the family doctor for decades, a discreet and competent man who had accompanied both the moments of joy and the moments of tragedy in the billionaire's life. It was he who had brought the devastating news about the death of his wife and daughter 6 years ago. "What does this mean?" asked the doctor, finding his patient in the office while the girl took a bath upstairs. "I need a DNA test," said the billionaire bluntly. "As soon as possible." Dr. Harrison adjusted his glasses, processing the information. "DNA? What for? And who is that child?" "She has a mark." The words came out loaded with an emotion that he was trying to control. "The same mark you told me my daughter would have." The silence that followed was heavy as lead. The doctor stared at him with an expression that mixed concern and disbelief. "My friend," he said finally, his voice careful, "you have been through immense trauma. It's natural that—" "No!" The interruption was sharp. "It's not trauma. It's not coincidence. It's her. That's impossible. You know it's impossible. I myself, you told me she died." The billionaire's eyes fixed on the doctor's with an intensity that was almost physical. "But what if you were wrong? What if there was something we didn't know?" Dr. Harrison sighed deeply. He had known this man long enough to know that when something stuck in his mind, it was impossible to dissuade him. Better to do the test and prove scientifically that it was a cruel coincidence than to let him feed a hope that could destroy him again. "All right," he agreed reluctantly, "but promise me you'll accept the results, whatever they may be." Meanwhile, upstairs, the girl was experiencing for the first time in her life the sensation of warm water running over her skin. The bathtub was bigger than some of the rooms where she had slept. The soap had a sweet and delicate smell that made her think of flowers she saw in the gardens she passed by. The towels were soft as clouds. When she came down, wearing clean clothes that the housekeeper had managed to borrow from a neighbor, she looked like a completely different child. The washed hair revealed golden highlights in the sunlight. The clean skin showed delicate features that the dirt had hidden. But it was the eyes that were most impressive. Large, expressive, filled with an intelligence that the hard life on the streets had sharpened like a blade. The billionaire's heart ached when he saw her. Clean and well cared for, the resemblance to his late wife was even more evident. The shape of her face, the line of her jaw, even the way she tilted her head when she paid attention to something. "She needs to eat," said Dr. Harrison, noting the child's extreme thinness, "and she needs medical attention. When was the last time she was vaccinated? When did she last see a dentist? An eye doctor?" The questions went unanswered because the girl didn't speak, or didn't want to speak, or maybe she had forgotten how to trust adults. During dinner, she ate slowly, almost fearfully, as if she expected someone to take the plate away from her at any moment. Her manners were surprisingly delicate for someone who had grown up on the street. She held the silverware correctly, chewed without making noise, wiped her mouth with the napkin. "Where did you learn that?" he asked, intrigued. She stared at him for a long moment before answering in a small, hoarse voice, as if it were rusted from disuse. "The lady at the shelter. Before I left, she taught me." Those were the first words she spoke, and they fell on him like a weight. There had been a shelter. There had been someone who cared enough to teach her good manners. There was a story, a past, people who might miss her. At night, after settling her in one of the guest rooms, he stayed up late, looking out the window and wondering if he was going crazy. Logic said yes. The chances of a child dead for 6 years appearing alive on a street corner were astronomical. But his heart, that treacherous organ he thought he had learned to ignore, whispered other possibilities. What if the doctors had lied? What if there was a conspiracy? What if his daughter had really been alive all these years, growing up abandoned on the streets while he accumulated fortunes and sank into loneliness? The DNA test would take a few days. Until then, he would have to live with the uncertainty and with a girl who carried on her face the mark of all his lost hopes. The days that followed were the strangest in the billionaire's life. His routine, meticulously organized for years, was completely disrupted by the presence of a child who didn't know how to deal with the luxury around her. On the first morning, he found her sleeping on the floor next to the bed, curled up in her own dirty clothes that she had managed to recover from the trash. When he asked why she hadn't slept in the bed, she replied with devastating simplicity, "Beds are for important people." It took 3 days to convince her that she was allowed to use the bed, the bathroom, to order food when she was hungry. 3 days for her to stop hiding when she heard footsteps in the hallway. 3 days for her to understand that she wouldn't be kicked out at the first mistake. During this time, he cancelled important meetings, postponed business trips, ignored urgent phone calls. His partners began to question his behavior. His secretary, too polite to ask directly, made subtle comments about the importance of keeping the schedule up to date. But for the first time in years, he didn't care about profits, stocks, or acquisitions. He was fascinated watching that little creature relearn to live in safety. She had curious habits. She kept food under her pillow. For later, she explained when questioned, she took extremely quick baths, as if the hot water were going to disappear at any moment. She slept with one eye open, waking up at the slightest noise. But she also had a sharp intelligence that impressed him. She absorbed information like a sponge. When he showed her the books in the library, her eyes lit up in a way that made something inside him warm. She couldn't read very well, but she recognized some words and had a thirst for knowledge that was touching. "Why do you want to learn?" he asked one afternoon, finding her leafing through a book of photographs of different countries. "Because—" She hesitated, as if she were trying to translate complex thoughts into simple words. "Because when you know things, you don't get lost." The answer hit him like a punch to the gut. That child had learned, in the harshness of life, that knowledge was power, that information was survival. Gradually she began to open up. She told him fragments of her story, the shelter that had closed for lack of funding when she was 4 years old, the families who tried to adopt her but gave up. "I didn't smile enough," she explained with a heartbreaking naturalness, "the nights sleeping in doorways and under bridges." "And you never knew anything about your parents?" he asked carefully, fearing the answer. "The auntie at the shelter said they found me on the doorstep, that there was a note saying my mum couldn't take care of me." She instinctively touched the mark on her face, and that I had this, that it was special. Special, the word echoed in his mind. His wife always said that their birthmark was special, a sign that they were different, unique. At night, when she finally fell asleep, he stayed in the hallway just watching. He couldn't explain what he felt. It was a mixture of protection, tenderness, and something deeper that he didn't dare name until he was sure. She started calling him Sir, but sometimes, when she was relaxed and distracted, the word Dad almost escaped her lips before she quickly corrected herself. Dr. Harrison stopped by daily to monitor the girl's health. In addition to malnutrition, which was being treated with a balanced diet, she had some vitamin deficiencies and signs of chronic stress. But nothing that proper care couldn't fix. "She's getting attached to you," observed the doctor one morning. "And you to her. What are you going to do if the test—" "Don't say it," interrupted the billionaire. "Not yet." But the question hung in the air, heavy and inevitable. What would happen if the DNA proved he was wrong? How would he explain to that child that she would have to go back to the life she knew? How would he himself return to his empty existence after having experienced what it was like to have a purpose greater than accumulating wealth? On the fourth night, he woke up to noises coming from her room. He ran to see what was happening and found her sitting on the floor, rocking and whispering words he couldn't understand. "What is it?" he asked, kneeling beside her. "Nightmare," she replied with a choked voice. "I always have them. I dream that someone is looking for me, but they never find me." He felt his heart break. Without thinking, he picked her up in his arms and took her to his own bed. She curled up against his chest like a frightened puppy, and for the first time in 6 years, he felt complete. "No one will ever leave you alone again," he whispered in the dark, a promise he didn't know if he could keep. And so it was, with a child asleep in his arms and the soft scent of her clean hair filling his lungs, that he finally admitted to himself what he already knew. It didn't matter what the DNA test said. That girl was already his daughter in every way that truly mattered. A week had passed since the DNA test had been taken, a week of mutual discoveries, of barriers being broken down slowly, of 2 wounded hearts learning to trust again. The girl was no longer the frightened creature who hid in the corners. She had begun to explore the mansion with growing curiosity, touching expensive objects with the reverent care of someone who had never owned anything. Her questions were constant and intelligent. "Why does this table shine so much? How do they make those pictures so pretty? How many books fit in this library?" He discovered that she had a talent for drawing. With colored pencils he had bought, she created works that left him speechless, not for the technique, which was still childish, but for the emotion they conveyed. She drew the street where she had lived, but full of flowers. She drew the shelter, but with all the children smiling. She drew herself, but with a family beside her. "Who are these people?" he asked, pointing to the figures beside her in the drawing. "My dream family," she replied without looking up from the paper. "A dad who won't leave, a mom who sings me to sleep, and a house where no one is hungry." The innocence of that answer devastated him. She still dreamed of things that most children considered basic: security, love, a home. But it wasn't just happy discoveries. Some of the girl's behaviors revealed deep traumas that would take time to heal. She kept food hidden throughout the house, even knowing that meals were guaranteed. She woke up screaming in the middle of the night, dreaming of chases and abandonment. She still flinched when someone made sudden movements. The most painful thing was seeing her constantly apologize for existing. Sorry for getting the rug dirty, sorry for making noise, sorry for eating too much, as if her presence were a nuisance that needed to be constantly justified. "You don't have to apologize for anything," he always said. "This is your home now. You have the right to be here." Slowly, she began to believe it. It was around this time that the first external problems began to arise. The housekeeper, although too professional to question directly, clearly disapproved of the situation. His friends from high society made veiled comments about certain social responsibilities and maintaining appropriate distances. The press also began to notice something strange. Paparazzi photographers caught his car stopping to buy toys. Speculation about his personal life began to circulate in the gossip columns. Some even suggested that he had had an affair and was now claiming an illegitimate daughter. "Sir," said his secretary one morning, "perhaps it would be better to hire a specialized institution to care for the child while you resolve the situation." The suggestion infuriated him in a way that surprised even himself. She is not a situation to be resolved, and she's not going anywhere. But the external pressures were just the beginning. The real test came when his ex-sister-in-law showed up unannounced. She entered the mansion like a hurricane of expensive perfume and indignation. "What is this I'm hearing? That you've adopted a street girl? Have you completely lost your mind?" The girl, who was playing in the living room, immediately cowered. When she heard the loud, aggressive voice, instinctively, she ran to hide behind him. "She's not adopted," he said calmly, placing a protective hand on the child's shoulder. "Not officially yet." "You can't be serious. A street child? You don't even know where she came from, what diseases she might have, what kind of people her parents are." "Shut up." The coldness in his voice made the woman recoil. "Don't talk like that in front of her." But the damage was done. The girl pulled on his sleeve and whispered, "She doesn't like me. Am I going to have to leave?" The fear in her eyes made him make the most important decision of his life. He knelt down to her level and held her face with both hands. "Listen carefully," he said, with an intensity that even silenced his ex-sister-in-law. "You will never have to leave again. You will never be alone again. You will never go hungry or be afraid again, I promise." "But what if people don't like me?" she asked in a small voice. "Then people are wrong," he replied, "and I'm going to prove it to them." That night, after the unwanted visitor had left, promising to talk to lawyers about this madness, he took action. He hired the best lawyers in the city to begin the adoption process. He hired security to protect their privacy. He hired a private tutor so that she wouldn't have to face the cruel curiosity of the other children in a conventional school. But the most important decision was the one he made alone, in the privacy of his office, looking at a photo of his late wife. "I don't know if she's our daughter biologically," he whispered to the photograph, "but she is my daughter of the heart, and I'm going to fight for her, as I should have fought for you." That same night, the girl had the first good dream since arriving at the mansion. She dreamed that she was flying over the city, but this time she wasn't running away. She was looking for something, and when she finally found it, it was a man in a suit who held out his arms to her, not to catch her, but to hug her. The phone rang on a Thursday morning, cutting through the silence of the breakfast that had become a sacred ritual between them. The girl was eating pancakes, her new passion, while he read the financial reports, but in reality, he watched her every move over the papers. "Dr. Harrison," he said when he answered, but the doctor's formal tone already foreshadowed important news. "I need to see you, now, alone." The billionaire's heart raced. The DNA result had arrived. After 2 weeks of hope and fear, he would finally know the truth. "Finish eating," he said to the girl, trying to keep his voice normal. "I have a quick meeting in the office." She nodded, but her perceptive eyes caught the tension in his voice. "Is everything okay?" she asked with that intuition that wounded children develop to detect problems. "Everything's okay," he lied, kissing the top of her head before leaving. Dr. Harrison was waiting in the office with an expression that was impossible to decipher. He carried a folder of documents and the grave demeanor of someone who carries news that will change everything. "Sit down," said the doctor. "Just say it." The billionaire remained standing, his fists clenched at his sides. "Is she or isn't she?" Dr. Harrison opened the folder slowly, as if each movement were carefully calculated. "The DNA results are conclusive," he said finally. "She is your biological daughter." The silence that followed was deafening. The world seemed to stop, spinning. All the secret hopes, all the fears, all the doubts crystallized into a single overwhelming certainty. How? The question came out hoarse, loaded with an emotion he couldn't control. "I've spent the last few days investigating, reviewing old files, talking to people who worked at the hospital back then." The doctor paused, as if gathering courage. "There was a nurse, a woman who was fired a few months after your wife's delivery. She had serious financial problems, a sick child, hospital debts." The billionaire felt the blood run cold in his veins. "Go on." "She was approached by a couple who couldn't have children, wealthy people, but who couldn't get an adoption, through legal means for reasons that aren't relevant. They offered a significant sum for a healthy newborn. Reality began to take shape like a macabre puzzle. She sold my daughter. Worse than that." Dr. Harrison took more documents out of the folder. "She falsified the medical records, told you and the other doctors that the child had died, arranged a fake funeral with an empty coffin, gave your daughter to the couple who paid her. The world collapsed. 6 years, 6 years of mourning for a daughter who was alive, 6 years in which she grew up with strangers, was abandoned, went hungry, lived on the streets while he accumulated fortunes and sank into loneliness. The couple who bought her, where are they? Dead. Car accident when she was 2 years old. That's when she ended up in the foster care system." The cruelty of fate was almost unbearable. His daughter had been sold like a commodity, lost her adoptive parents, grown up institutionalized, and then abandoned on the streets, all while her biological father was one of the richest men in the country. "The nurse?" he asked, his voice dangerously low. "Fled the country shortly after, never seen again." Rage. That's what he felt now, a pure, incandescent rage that burned away all other emotions. Rage at the nurse who sold his daughter, rage at the system that allowed it to happen, rage at himself for not investigating, for accepting the doctor's word, for burying his pain in work instead of seeking answers. But above all, a deep pain for the childhood his daughter had lost, for the years of abandonment, fear, and suffering she had faced alone. "There's more," said Dr. Harrison softly. "I talked to social workers who worked with her. She was a special child. Even in the worst moments, she never lost her kindness. She protected other younger children. She shared food when she had it. The shelter staff remember her fondly." A tear ran down the billionaire's face. His daughter had grown up suffering, but she had maintained her goodness. She had become a good person despite everything the world had done to her. "Does she know?" he asked. "No. I thought it best that you decide how to tell her." He was silent for long minutes, processing the information. His daughter was alive, she was safe, she was home. But how to explain to a 6-year-old that her entire life had been a lie? How to say that he hadn't abandoned her, that he had been looking for her without knowing? "There's something else you need to know," said Dr. Harrison hesitantly. "The investigation I did hasn't gone unnoticed. Some people know that you've discovered the truth, and not everyone is happy about it." "What does that mean?" "It means that those who benefited from the original cover-up may try to interfere. Now, the hospital, some administrators, influential people who may have been involved in the scheme, they won't want this to come to light." The billionaire felt a wave of determination wash over all the emotional turmoil. It didn't matter who tried to interfere. It didn't matter how many enemies he made. It didn't matter how much it cost. His daughter had been stolen from him once. She wouldn't be stolen again. "Prepare all the legal documents," he said, with a firmness that made the doctor step back. "I want the paternity officialized. I want maximum security, and I want every person involved in this scheme prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law." When he returned to the living room, he found the girl, his daughter, drawing another, one of her colorful pictures. This time, she had drawn 2 birds in a nest, a big one protecting a small one. "What a beautiful drawing," he said, his voice choked. "It's a bird family," she explained without looking up. "The daddy bird found the baby bird that was lost, and now they live together forever." He knelt beside her, his heart overflowing, with love and pain in equal measure. "What if I told you," he whispered, "that sometimes daddy birds look for their baby birds for a very, very long time?" She stopped drawing and looked at him with those huge, wise eyes. "What if I told you that you were never really lost, just far from home?" And the revelation of the truth should have been a moment of pure joy, but the world rarely allows happiness to flourish without obstacles. 2 days after telling the girl that she was really his daughter, a conversation that ended with tears, of relief and the first true daddy, she said, the problems began to materialize like storm clouds. The first blow came through a sealed envelope delivered by a process server, a lawsuit filed by a consortium of investors questioning his mental competence to run the business empire. The petition alleged erratic behavior, impulsive decisions, inconsistent with fiduciary responsibility, and clear signs of emotional instability. The leader of the consortium was Victor Reginald, his former partner, and now avowed rival. An ambitious man who had been waiting for years for an opportunity to take control of the companies. The adoption of a child of dubious origin had provided exactly the ammunition he needed. "It's ridiculous," said the lead attorney during the emergency meeting, "but we can't ignore it. They have enough influence to cause serious problems." "Let them try," replied the billionaire with a coldness that surprised even his oldest advisors. "They won't touch my daughter." But Victor had prepared carefully. Photographs were leaked to the press, distorted images that showed an unidentified child living in the billionaire's mansion. Sensational headlines began to circulate: sex scandal or illegal adoption, the dark side of philanthropy, street child held hostage by millionaire. The executive television was called one morning, his expression as grave as a harbinger of bad news. "Sir, the board is pushing. Shareholders are nervous. Stocks have dropped 12% since the speculation began." He listened in silence, calculating. He knew this was only the first wave. Victor wouldn't stop there, and he didn't. The second blow came through Child Protective Services. An anonymous complaint alleged that a child was being kept in questionable conditions by an emotionally unstable man. The social worker arrived without warning, demanding a complete inspection. The girl, who had finally begun to feel safe, was terrified by the presence of strangers asking questions about her life. She hid behind her father, trembling like a frightened puppy. "I don't want to leave," she whispered, clinging to his shirt. "Please don't let them take me." His heart broke into 1,000 pieces. "No one is going to take you," he promised. But for the first time since he had found her, he wasn't sure if he could keep the promise. The social worker was professional, but clearly influenced by the biased reports she had received. She made notes about the excessively luxurious environment for a child of humble origins, questioned the absence of adequate female supervision, and suggested that perhaps a more structured environment would be beneficial for the minor's development. "How's a more structured?" he asked, his voice dangerously low. "A traditional family, sir, with both parents. A more conventional routine." After she left, he found his daughter crying in the room, packing her few clothes into a small backpack. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Getting ready," she replied between sobs. "Whenever the important people come to ask questions, it's because I'm going to have to leave." He knelt before her and held her small, trembling hands. "Listen carefully. You are my daughter, not by paper, not by law, not by convenience, by blood, by heart, by soul. And I will fight against the whole world if necessary to protect you." "But what if they are stronger than you?" she asked with that precocious wisdom that broke his heart. "Then we'll find out what a desperate father is capable of." The third blow was the most cruel. Victor had hired investigators to find anything he could use against them, and he found it. The nurse who had sold the child years ago was alive, living under a false identity in a country without an extradition treaty. But her old medical records still existed, and Victor gained access to them. In a masterstroke of manipulation, he did not immediately expose the truth about the child's sale. Instead, he used the information to sow doubts. Medical reports leaked, suggesting that the DNA test might have been tampered with. Experts questioned the authenticity of the documents. The narrative that Victor built was that a rich and desperate man had fabricated evidence to justify his obsession with a street child. The pressure became unbearable. Journalists camped out at the gates of the mansion. Helicopters hovered over the property trying to capture images. His daughter could no longer play in the garden without being photographed. Worse still, she began to believe the lies. "Maybe they're right," she said one night after hearing part of a news report on television. "Maybe you're just imagining I'm your daughter because you want it to be true so badly." "Do you believe that?" he asked. She hesitated, a hesitation that cut deeper than any public accusation. "I don't know what to believe anymore," she whispered. It was then that he knew he had lost the first battle. Victor had managed to plant the seed of doubt not only in public opinion, but in the heart of the child herself. That night, alone in his office, he made the most difficult decision of his life. He called the best custody lawyer in the country. "I need you to prepare the papers," he said with a broken voice. "If things get worse, if she really believes that she would be better off away from me, I want her to go to a family that loves her, a family that can give her a normal life, without scandals, without headlines." It was the final proof of his paternal love, being willing to give her up if it was best for her. But some battles are worth any sacrifice, and some parents discover that they are capable of much more than they imagined when their children are in danger. The war was just beginning. The decision to fight back came on a grey Saturday morning, when he found his daughter sitting at the window, looking melancholically at the garden where she could no longer play due to the paparazzi. She had lost weight in recent weeks, losing the sparkle in her eyes that had taken so much work to rekindle. "Am I ruining your life?" she asked suddenly, without taking her eyes off the window. The question hit him like a lightning bolt. "Why do you ask that?" "Because before I came you were happy, you had an organized life, and now you have all these problems because of me." He knelt next to the armchair where she was sitting, forcing her to look him in the eyes. "Listen carefully, my daughter. Before you came I wasn't happy. I was empty. I had money, I had power, I had everything the world says matters, but I didn't have you, and without you none of that was worth anything. But what if we find out That I'm not really your daughter? What if the tests are wrong? Then you would still be my daughter, he replied without hesitation. Because family isn't just blood. It's choice. It's love. It's deciding that a person is so important that you would do anything to protect them. For the first time in weeks, she smiled, a small but genuine smile. It was at that moment that he decided that he wouldn't stay on the defensive. It was time to counterattack. His first move was to hire the most respected private investigator in the country, a woman known for her ability to uncover truths that others preferred to keep buried. He gave her unlimited resources and a single instruction. I want to know everything about Victor Reginald, everything about the nurse's scheme, and everything about who else was involved. The second move was riskier. He decided to publicly tell the truth about his daughter's origins, how she had been sold, how he had found her, how the DNA had proven their kinship. It was a move that could blow up in his face, but the alternative was to allow Victor's lies to define the narrative. He scheduled an exclusive interview with the most respected journalist in the country. Not a sensationalist program, but a professional known for his integrity and ability to separate facts from fiction. Are you sure? Asked his lawyer. Once you make this public, there's no turning back. There's no turning back already, he replied. My daughter is suffering. I'd rather fight openly than let her believe she's a burden. The interview was broadcast on a Thursday night, prime time. He told everything: the false death of his daughter, the discovery of the corrupt nurse, the reunion on the street, the DNA test. He showed documents, presented evidence, spoke with brutal honesty about his pain and his joy. But the most powerful moment was when he brought his daughter on television. "This is my daughter," he said simply, with her sitting beside him. "She was stolen from me when she was born. She spent 6 years suffering when she should have been at home, safe and loved. I'm not going to apologize for finding her, and I'm not going to allow anyone to try to separate her from me again." The child, who had rehearsed only a few words, looked directly at the camera with those big, sincere eyes. "I remember dreaming that I had a daddy," she said in a clear voice, "and now I do. He taught me that family is when someone loves you, even when you're scared, and I'm not scared anymore." The public reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Social networks exploded with support. Hashtags like "Justice for the Family" and "Stolen Child" became trending topics. People began to share their own stories of adoption, loss, and reunion. More importantly, other similar cases began to emerge. Families who had lost babies under suspicious circumstances in the same hospital. Nurses who remembered irregularities. Former employees who had been fired for asking inconvenient questions. The private investigator gained access to Victor's bank records, and she discovered something devastating. He had received substantial payments from an insurance company that profited from the false death claims at the hospital. It wasn't just business ambition, it was complicity in a criminal scheme. When this information came to light, it was Victor who found himself on the defensive. The shares of his companies plummeted. Federal investigations were opened. He, who thought he was destroying a rival, discovered that he had messed with forces greater than his ambition. But the most important victory did not come from the headlines or the courts. It came on a Sunday morning when his daughter came down for breakfast and, for the first time in weeks, was humming. "I dreamed that we were birds," she told him as she ate her pancakes, "and we were flying really high where no one could reach us, and you were teaching me how to find my way home." "And how do you find your way home?" he asked. "By following your heart," she replied with the simple wisdom of children. He knew then that they had won the most important battle, not the one that was fought in the courts or in the media, but the one that was fought in the heart of a child who finally believed that she deserved to be loved. The war was not over, but they would face together whatever came next. like a true family. The courtroom was packed on a December morning that promised to define not only the future of a family, but to set legal precedents about parental rights, medical corruption, and the very definition of justice. Cameras were prohibited inside the room, but outside, journalists from across the country awaited the verdict that would close the most followed case of recent years. The billionaire entered hand in hand with his daughter, who wore a navy blue dress, her favorite color, and carried a drawing she had made the night before, a family of 3 people under a rainbow. "For good luck," she had explained. Across the room, Victor and his lawyers occupied a table filled with documents and confident expressions. He had arrived accompanied by experts in child development, psychologists who had never met the girl, but were ready to testify that she would be better off in a more structured environment. The judge, a gray-haired woman with a penetrating gaze known for her impartiality and rigor, called the session to order. "This case," she said, "goes beyond the custody of a child. We are here to determine truths about corruption, to investigate the integrity of our healthcare system, and above all, to decide what is best for a minor who has already suffered enough trauma for a lifetime." The first day was dominated by technical evidence. Medical documents were analyzed, hospital records were reviewed, expert witnesses debated the authenticity of the DNA tests. The private investigator presented her findings on the baby selling scheme, revealing a network that had operated for years before being discovered. The corrupt nurse had been located and extradited. Her testimony, given via video conference from a federal penitentiary, was devastating. She confessed everything. The financial pressure, the proposal from the wealthy couple, the falsification of medical records, the staged funeral. Her tears seemed genuine, but they came too late to ease the suffering she had caused. Victor tried to distance himself from the criminal aspects, claiming that he had acted in good faith based on information he believed to be true. But the bank records showed a different reality. Payments received from companies that profited from the medical frauds. Investments made based on privileged information about life insurance cases. On the second day, it was the turn of the personal. Testimonies. Social workers who had known the girl during her years in the shelters spoke about her resilience, her kindness with other children, her exceptional intelligence. Orphanage staff remembered her as a child who never caused problems, who always shared the little she had. "She was special," said a former shelter employee, wiping her eyes. "Even when she was hungry, if a younger child appeared crying, she would share her food. She said that the little ones need it more. I always thought that she would be adopted quickly because of this natural goodness." The most difficult testimony came from Dr. Harrison, who had to publicly admit how he had been deceived by the falsified documents. "For 6 years, I carried the guilt of not having been able to save that child," he said, his voice choked. "Discovering that she was alive, but suffering on the streets while I believed she was dead, it's something that will haunt me for the rest of my life." When it was Victor's turn to testify, he tried to maintain the corporate composure that had always characterized him. He claimed that his actions had been motivated by legitimate concern for the child's well-being and fiduciary responsibility to the shareholders. He suggested that a single man, however wealthy, was not prepared to adequately raise a child who had suffered such significant trauma. A girl who has gone through these experiences needs stability, a traditional family structure, specialized care that only professionals can offer, he argued. It was then that the billionaire's lawyer asked the question that changed everything. "Mr. Victor, at any point during these months of concern for the child's well-being, did you try to meet her personally, talk to her, ask her what she wanted?" The silence that followed was eloquent. Victor had never bothered to get to know the child about whose future he was deciding. On the third day, the most anticipated moment arrived, the testimony of the girl herself. The judge had decided to hear her in private chambers, only with the essential lawyers present to minimize the pressure on her. She entered the smaller room hand in hand with a child psychologist, but her eyes immediately searched for her father. When she saw him, her face lit up with a smile that melted even the most skeptical hearts present. "Do you know why you're here?" the judge asked. Gently. "Yes," she replied in a clear voice, "to decide where I'm going to live." "And where would you like to live?" "With my dad." The answer came without hesitation. "Why?" She thought for a moment, as if she were organizing complex thoughts into simple words. "Because he taught me that I'm important, that I can dream, that I don't have to hide when I make noise or when I eat too much. He said that a family is when someone chooses to love you, and he chose me. But other people say that maybe it would be better for you to live with a different family, with a mom and a dad." "I've already had a lot of different families," she replied with that precocious wisdom that continued to surprise. "At the shelter, in the houses where they tried to place me. But it never worked because they didn't really want me. My dad really wants me. Even when I'm sad, even when I have nightmares, even when people say bad things about him because of me." The child psychologist, an experienced professional who had evaluated hundreds of cases, was categorical in her opinion. "This child demonstrates clear signs of secure attachment with the father. Removing her from this environment would be traumatic and potentially detrimental to her psychological development." When the testimonies ended, the judge called a recess for deliberation. During the 3 hours that followed, father and daughter waited in an adjacent room, she drawing to distract herself, he trying to control the anxiety that threatened to consume him. "What if they say I have to leave?" she asked at one point. "Then we'll fight," he replied. "And if we can't win by fighting, we'll go somewhere where we can stay together. Even if that means leaving everything behind." "You are everything," he said simply. When they were called back to the courtroom, the tension was palpable. The judge read her decision with the solemnity that the moment demanded. After analyzing all the evidence, listening to all the testimonies, and considering the best interest of the minor, this court decides that custody will remain with the biological father. Furthermore, I order that federal investigations proceed against all those involved in the scheme to sell newborns, and that measures be taken to prevent similar cases from happening again. The explosion of relief and joy that followed echoed throughout the building. But in the center of it all, a 6-year-old girl just turned to the man beside her and said, "Now can I call you Daddy without being afraid?" "Forever," he replied, picking her up in his arms while tears of gratitude ran down his face. 6 months after the trial, the mansion had transformed completely. Where before reigned the austere silence of loneliness, now echoed laughter, music, and the joyful noise of a child being a child. The garden, once perfect but empty, had a swing hanging from the old tree, a treehouse painted in vibrant colors, and flower beds where she planted flowers with the dedication of someone who had never before had a place to call her own. The routine of the house now revolved around the needs and discoveries of a girl who was learning to be happy. Every morning he woke her up with tickles and kisses, and she ran to the kitchen where they had breakfast together. Pancakes were still her favorite dish, but now she ate without rushing, knowing that there would always be more if she wanted. The private tutor he had hired was a young and caring woman who quickly realized the extraordinary potential hidden behind years of lost education. His daughter had a brilliant mind that absorbed knowledge like a dry sponge absorbs water. Math, science, literature, everything fascinated her because it represented possibilities that she didn't even know existed before. "Daddy," she said one afternoon, looking up from a book about astronomy. Did you know that there are more stars in the sky than grains of sand on all the beaches in the world? I didn't know, he replied, despite knowing that fact for decades. But seeing her discover the world through her own eyes was like experiencing everything for the first time. That means there's so much space up there for dreams that we're never going to run out of room to store them all. Phrases like that came naturally from her mouth, small philosophies from a child who had learned to find magic even in suffering. He began to write down these observations in a notebook, not out of sentimentality, but because he recognized in them a wisdom that life had cost him decades to acquire. The nightmares still happened occasionally. She would wake up screaming, looking for him in the dark, trembling with memories of abandonment and fear. But now he was always there, holding her until the terror passed, whispering promises of safety until she fell back asleep. The nightmares are getting smaller, she observed one morning after a particularly quiet night. I think it's because the good dreams are getting bigger and there's not so much room left for the bad ones. The company underwent a complete restructuring after Victor's downfall. New governance systems were implemented. The board of directors was renewed, and he decided to diversify investments to include a foundation focused on abandoned children and victims of human trafficking. It was his way of transforming the pain of the past into protection for the future. "Why do you want to help other children?" asked his daughter when he explained about the foundation. "Because no child should go through what you went through. And because now I know that family isn't just who you're born with. Sometimes it's who you find." She thought about it for a long moment. "Then let's create a very big family." "The biggest family in the world," he promised. The mark on her face, which had once caused so much commotion, was now just part of her unique beauty. She didn't try to hide it or be ashamed. When other children asked about it, she replied with simplicity, "It's my special mark. My daddy has one just like it in his heart." In August, almost a year after they had met, she made an unusual request. "Can I visit the street where you found me?" He hesitated. "Why?" "I want to see if there are still other children there. I want to bring food and toys. I want them to know that someone cares." The emotional maturity of that request left him speechless. She wanted to return to the place of her suffering, not to relive traumas, but to alleviate the suffering of others. They organized an expedition the following weekend. They took bags full of sandwiches, fruits, warm clothes, and toys. When they arrived at the corner where she used to look for food in the trash, they found 3 children in the same situation. His daughter approached them without fear, offering food and talking with the naturalness of someone who perfectly understood that reality. There was no pity in her approach, only understanding and solidarity. "Do you have a family?" she asked a boy who couldn't have been more than 5 years old. He shook his head sadly. "Then now you do," she said, looking at her father. "Don't you, Daddy?" At that moment, he knew that his daughter had become the person she was always destined to be, not despite the suffering she had faced, but because of the compassion she had developed through it. Months later, 3 new children were running through the corridors of the mansion. The boy from the street, a sister they found in another shelter, and a little girl with a disability that no one wanted to adopt. The house had filled with voices, laughter, children's art stuck to the walls, and that kind of joyful chaos that only large families can create. "Our family is getting perfect," said his daughter one night during the bedtime story ritual. "It was perfect from the day you arrived," he replied. "The rest is just bonus." "Daddy." "Yes?" "Do you think my mom, my real mom, would be happy knowing that you found me?" It was a question she had never asked before, and he felt the weight of responsibility to answer it correctly. "I think," he said carefully, "that your mom would be proud of the amazing person you have become." And I think she would be happy knowing that you are safe, loved, and using your experience to help other children. Sometimes I dream about her, confessed the girl, and in the dream, she tells me that I don't need to feel guilty for being happy. Mom's dreams are always true, he said, kissing her forehead. That night, after all the children were asleep, he stood on the porch looking at the stars. Life had taught him that happiness is not the absence of problems, but the presence of enough love to face them together. His daughter appeared at the door, wearing the unicorn pajamas that she herself had chosen. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "I was just thinking," he said. "About what?" "About how sometimes life takes us through the most painful paths to bring us to where we really need to be." She snuggled next to him, small and warm against his arm. "Daddy?" "Yes?" "I love you more than all the stars in the sky. And I love you more than all the dreams ever dreamed," he replied. They stood there in silence, father and daughter, looking at the infinite and knowing that they had found, in each other, everything they needed to be happy. The fortune he had spent a lifetime accumulating paled before the wealth he now possessed. A family built not only of blood, but of daily choices of love, protection, and dedication. The mark on her face shone softly under the starlight, no longer a symbol of mystery or separation, but a reminder that the best gifts in life sometimes come disguised as challenges, and that true love always finds a way back home. 2 years later, when she began attending a special school that he had founded for children with difficult histories, a journalist asked what he had learned from that whole experience. "I learned," he said, watching his daughter play in the yard with children who, like her, had been lost and were now found, that life isn't about how much money you accumulate or how many companies you own. It's about how many hearts you touch, and that sometimes saving a child is, in fact, allowing her to save you. The reporter asked if he had any advice for other adoptive parents. He looked at his daughter, who was running free and happy, and smiled. "Just one. When you find a child who needs a family, don't ask if you're ready to be a parent. Ask if you're ready to be transformed. Because raising a child who has gone through trauma isn't just about giving love. It's about learning to receive a type of love that you didn't even know existed." The mark on his daughter's face had become a symbol of a national campaign against child trafficking. Her story had inspired changes in legislation, reforms in the adoption system, and the rescue of dozens of other families separated by similar crimes. But for him, none of that mattered as much as the simple fact that every night, when saying prayers before bed, she still whispered, "Thank you for finding me, Daddy. Thank you for choosing me." And he always replied, "Thank you for letting me choose you. Thank you for teaching me what it really means to be rich." The true wealth, he had discovered, was not in the coffers or in the stocks. It was in the goodnight hugs, in the drawings stuck on the refrigerator, in the conversations about stars and dreams, and in the absolute certainty that some loves are strong enough to survive any storm. His daughter had come into his life as a street urchin, marked by poverty and abandonment, but she had become the heir to something much more valuable than money. She had inherited a heart transformed by love and the responsibility to spread that love throughout the world. And when she grew up and had her own choices to make, she would carry with her the most important lesson he could teach: that family is created every day, with each choice to love, protect, and never give up on those who matter. The mark on her face would continue to be unique, but now it represented not a loss, but an encounter. Not an end, but a new beginning. Not a scar, but a star, guiding other lost parents and daughters back home. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to receive new stories every day. What would you do in the billionaire's place? comment below and share this story with someone special.